Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
My name is Gena Chang-Campbell. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. June 7th, 2020, in the throes of COVID. I went out for a relaxing motorcycle ride. Might be a little bit unusual for a mom of two, but that's always been the way that I go and get my zen, have some time away, some meditative, contemplative moments where I can really think about life and reflect on what's really important to me. So on that sunny summer Sunday evening, I bid farewell to my husband and my two sons playing basketball out on their net in the driveway at about 7 p.m., just after supper time. And I said, I'll be back in about an hour, guys. When I come back, we'll play some board games. Yay, Mom, some Monopoly maybe? He said, sure, we can play Monopoly, no problem. So I said, bye, kissed them quick, said, see you in an hour, and off I went on my ninja. I was headed out on a beautiful evening thinking, wow, so blessed. I think I've gotten every single green light. And then just as I was going through one of the green lights, I thought to myself, should I go straight or should I turn right? And I thought, I'll go straight. I'm in no rush, just out for a joyride anyhow. That was my last memory until the next one, which was seeing a lot of lights, brightly lit, shining in my eyes in a very white room. And I heard a voice saying, you're at St. Michael's Hospital, Gena. You were airlifted here. You've been in a very serious motorcycle accident. Your mom has been desperately trying to reach you. We're holding the phone to your ear. Please go ahead and speak now. I heard in my ear sobbing, uncontrollable sobbing. Couldn't even make out the words. I hushed her. I said, Mom, it's fine. It's going to be okay. I'm okay. As I said that, I didn't at all know if that was the case. I couldn't feel any part of my body. That was my last memory for another 2 days. Lost to lots of surgeries with lots of fentanyl to get me through them, apparently. And when I gained consciousness again, I was in the trauma ward at St. Michael's Hospital. I came to learn I had been in a traumatic motorcycle accident as a car had hit me going quite fast, probably about 80 kilometers an hour. It was an elderly woman who hadn't seen me on the road. And so she hadn't quite slowed down to take account at all. And I had been knocked about 20 yards from my motorcycle, which was in a state of smithereens. In fact, I'll share that photo with you now. And as you can see from that photo, There was no chance of selling any part of that bike for parts. You couldn't give away any piece of it. It was completely in pieces. So you can imagine I'm 20 yards away from this bike, and I'm similarly in pieces, is what I came to learn. So after that accident, the list of injuries was extensive. I came to learn that I had been basically broken from left shoulder to left foot. They had rebuilt the insides of my left leg, put some plating in my right wrist, which was shattered. I had multiple internal injuries, lots of internal bleeding, tons of sprains, strains. My entire body was black and blue, but I was put back together. And after connecting with my husband and learning everyone was okay at home, albeit crying quite a bit, I missed them. I missed them intensely because it was COVID. Once again, no visits allowed, none at all. Thank God for video conferencing. That was the only way we could see one another. So after recovering for about a week in the trauma ward of this hospital, I was transferred to a long-term rehabilitation facility where I was told I would be spending a minimum of 3 months. And I quickly, in my stubborn way, said, no, that can't work. I can't see my family at all while I'm here. I need to go home in a month. That's when my wedding anniversary is. And, they gently laughed at me and said, well, Gena, you can't get yourself to a washroom right now. You can't take care of any of your own basic needs. It's going to take a while. To which I responded, I'm a very determined individual, so try me. If you have the resources, I will double, no triple, occupational therapy, physical therapy, anything that it takes to get me back on my feet and back to my family. And so the next month actually went by amazingly quickly and yet ever so slowly. I've never read so many books in my life. My wonderful husband dropped off a new pile every week for me, and I found a library within the rehab center, and I read anything and everything I could get my hands on. I connected with family and friends by phone when I could, made lots of friends, the hospital staff, and even more with the rehab patients. And it was such a great experience to get to learn about people from completely different walks of life and sit down and hear their stories about what had happened to them. Incidentally, it was a place where it was a lot of older folks and a lot of them, struggling to advocate for their own needs. And I felt myself quickly take up a role that I'd often played since my childhood. My friends used to call it Defender of the Weak. I would say an advocate for social justice whenever possible, even if it was just asking the manager of patient care over and over, but why, if there's no dietary concern, can my neighbor across the way who's been in this facility for years not have that Kit Kat bar that her daughter brings her to cheer her up? Or why my other elderly neighbor can't have some extra bottles of lotion when it's just one little thing that's keeping her happy and sane in this existence here for years. And I think while I was there, I learned a lot about myself. Having survived such a traumatic motorcycle accident, definitely there was the concept of resilience. I really did make good, and so did they, thankfully, on tripling my weekly activities to rehabilitate myself physically. And I did a lot of the psychological and mental work on my own. A lot of that was reflection time that I never would have gotten otherwise. I mean, so you can imagine, as a parent of 2 kids, an entrepreneur, someone who is always juggling and hustling various jobs and roles, the concept of having an entire month to myself in a rehabilitation facility, there were some good sides to that. All my meals cooked and presented to me on a tray every day. The capacity to really just sit and take things in, read them, discuss them with people if I so chose, write copious notes on things. And it really gave me an opportunity to think about my values in life. What does authenticity mean to someone who's been through something like this? I can tell you from my perspective a whole lot more. I've always done lots of work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, I think long before we named it as such, and always been very passionate about it. And I remember jokingly thinking to myself, well, I guess I can tick every box of intersectionality now. Anything that wasn't there before, now that as well. And as I thought through that and reflected on how lucky I was to be alive, how remarkable it was to have come through this accident. I mean, I was quoted some unbelievable statistics by some of my practitioners looking after me. Things like, I think it was an almost 90% chance that after an accident like this, if one did live, which was a slim chance in itself, the likelihood of coming out of a wheelchair was very low. Pleased to say that with all of that extra occupational and physical therapy and just some downright strong-willed stubbornness, I was out of a wheelchair in a month and using a walker. 3 months later, I was starting a new job that I had interviewed for successfully from my hospital bed and went to work on my cane for my first day at the end of September. So remember, the accident was June 7th. So at that time, I was just supposed to be coming out of rehab, but instead I was starting a new job to lead a new team and very excited about all of that. And to get back to what I was saying about authenticity and diversity and equity and inclusion, to live through something like this really made me reflect and ask myself, well, what for? How and why did you live through this? And on that reflection, I had a lot of time, as I said, to think this through and read a lot of people who've written about these things and, read a lot of stories as well. And in a lot of that, what I found was to live and to be here is such a gift. It cannot have been bestowed upon me to be anything other than my real and true self. Why would I be on this earth to be trying to make myself feel small, which I did in so many ways? I can share with you all that I became a doctor 15 years ago. 2023 was the first year that I started using my title doctor. Why? Because I was very self-aware about making others not feel comfortable in my presence. I was told you might look like, braggy if you put that title on your resume. It might be intimidating to people. It might be off-putting. And anything that didn't please others or make them feel comfortable in my presence, well, pre-accident Gena was not about that. Post-accident Gena, though, yeah, ready to take up a little bit more space. We'll start there. Ready to recognize that all the ways in which I want to be there for others as a professional certified coach, as a DEI practitioner, as someone who has really made it their life's work to be in service of humanity getting better for humanity. Why on earth would I try and be someone that I'm not? Why would I try and not take up the space that I'm constantly trying to help my clients provide for themselves and recognize their value and all they have to offer the world and all the reasons why they are very deserving of that space? I really had an opportunity to hold up a mirror to myself. It's very much as they say, doctor, heal thyself, coach thyself is what I was doing in a hospital bed for weeks. And I found it was transformational for me. And one of the things I learned about in that hospital bed, and I've continued to learn about as I journey through life in this, grand new chapter and adventure I'm in, is the concept of post-traumatic growth. So obviously, I did have and continue to work with some aspects of PTSD. And I'm sure lots of you heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. But I found not so many people knew about the other side of the coin. I know I didn't until I went through this experience, which is PTG, post-traumatic growth. That concept is one that's really stuck with me as a key life lesson. And I think the big question that I ask myself consistently is not why did this happen to me, but a small, tiny change of words. And learning about post-traumatic growth really helped me make this small shift, which is, why did this happen for me? Switching out that one little preposition changes so much. And when I sat with what happened and thought of it from that mindset, from that perspective, there were tons of great things that have happened for me since then. If just to start at the tip of the iceberg, an attitude of gratitude. I think I was always a grateful person. I've always been a highly spiritual person. And yet I don't think I could ever compare my pre-accident self to who I am now in terms of being able to recognize my blessings, being able to acknowledge them, being grateful for them, and putting that energy and that frequency forward. And of course, if I get better at that myself, I'm much better at offering that opportunity for my clients, whether they're individuals or whether I'm coaching a group or team, whether I'm working with an organization to improve their DEI outcomes, or on leadership in general, which has always been a huge passion of mine and a space that I have worked, played, developed in over decades. So I think sharing this experience with you all is, first of all, I must express my gratitude for that. For a part of post traumatic growth is the ability to share. And each time that I share my very personal story, I become a little bit more in ownership of it, I would say. Gives me an even deeper layer, peel back another, layer of an onion, I would say, of understanding of myself, of the situation I've been in, and more so too, I'd say, of my resilience, of my motivation for what I do and what I continue to do in life, for the ways in which I want to develop and continue to develop others as well. And when I think of this life-changing incident through that lens, I'm only too happy to share that it did happen for me, and that there are lots of things in your life that have probably been really difficult that happened for you too.
Wow. Dr. Gena, what an experience you had, based on who you are as a professional, the work that you do in diversity. It did happen for you. Tell me how that has helped you in relating to people with disabilities, and an increase in empathy, I would feel, from what you went through. Just explain that to us.
Yes, thank you, Katrina. Excellent question. So much more empathy. And again, I think just the profession I'm in by training and, the natural predilection for empathy would drive me towards something like coaching. And yet leaps and bounds more is what I have now. I think a great example is now classifying myself as someone with a disability. And a big thing I learned after this happened was the concept of disability being fluid. I was very grateful to learn about that, because I think in my head it was a static thing. You were born disabled or you weren't. And that's not at all the case. Most people become disabled at some point in their life through something like this accident. And it changed so much of my perception of accessibility, whether or not I could get into a building because of the flights of stairs and there's, no elevator access. A big one is travel. I travel a lot. I'm a consummate traveler. My children are as well. We're global travelers in my family. And I've continued to travel at the same pace since the accident. And as you can imagine, that has changed a lot. I have to use wheelchairs to navigate large spaces like airports, museums, etc. And so the experience of having to go to airports and wait for a wheelchair, the level of empathy I've gotten there, helping other people in wheelchairs navigate the airport space. And most of them, like my experience in the rehab center, tend to be elderly folks. And even experiencing a kind of reverse discrimination, as I'm not elderly, how many times wheelchair attendants have left me in airports. They'll literally walk by me with a wheelchair and I'll call them back and say, see, I have a cane. I'm the one you're looking for that you're supposed to pick up and get to my flight. I'm about to miss it. And there's been times when I've just had to do what I call the Terry Fox run and hop with my cane to catch a flight, or I'm going to miss that connection and not get one for 24 hours, from Europe to North America or something like that. And it's incredible how many people have to navigate that on a regular basis. And I'm so happy to help them, and I love languages as well. So helping folks with wheelchairs in different languages in airports, I feel like has become an extra hobby of mine that I'm really passionate about. And I would not have noticed that. I would not be in the same situation as they had I not also become a wheelchair user, to the point where I've had repeat experiences in the Toronto Pearson Airport, where I've seen the same person that I've helped to get through customs in her wheelchair the last time wave at me because we're about to catch another flight together months later, going to a completely different country. So it's wild. I call it the brother sisterhood of the wheelchair. I feel like it's a real thing when you're traveling.
Oh my gosh. So, can you share your philosophy on human capital cultivation and how it shapes your approach to coaching and leadership development?
Absolutely. I think that we are all in some way like raw clay. We can be shaped in different ways, and our environments and a lot of external factors, as well as intrinsic ones, will determine a lot of that. But I think a lot of it is also determined by ourselves, at least when we choose to acknowledge our role and our accountability and our ability to do so. And so when I think of human capital cultivation, I almost think of gardening humans. It's a funny concept, but it's the best way I can think about it. When I think of myself, I want to prune, reduce the weeds when I notice them coming up. But I also want to ensure that I'm in the best soil and that I'm giving myself the water, the good sleep hygiene, the nutritious foods that I need in order to grow well. Am I getting enough sunlight? And that's a literal, legitimate thing, especially at this
Yeah,
time of year in the Western Hemisphere here up in the north. And I look at others the same way. I think about, who do you want to be? What would you like to become? And how can we get you there? And what in your environment is nurturing you or perhaps being an obstacle or a barrier to you achieving those goals? And that's definitely what informs how I coach people and how I develop people as leaders as well.
that's really absolutely awesome. Now, in being a DEI champion, what has been some of the most impactful initiatives and strategies that you've implemented in corporate or non-profit environments?
I think I've done a lot of unconscious bias training, which I know that gets a hard knock life kind of reputation a lot of the time. But I think still it's foundational. It's fundamental to then moving forward. It's kind of the thing that helps get people aligned on what I think is the key ingredient and integral to pushing any kind of DEI strategy, which is self-awareness. And I think that's highly underrated because to
Yeah.
me, if we're going to talk about unconscious bias, really what it is driving and digging deeper into our own self awareness. Once we are more self aware, we can then kind of understand the impact that our behavior has on others. And as a coach, I'm always tuning into, is your intention and your impact aligning? Because oftentimes that's the miss. It's not that people are intentionally trying to be anything ist, racist, ageist, sexist. Rather, it's behaviors that they're perhaps not even aware of, or at least not aware that the impact of it is not aligning with the person they believe themselves to be and the values that they actually do hold dear. So for me, any strategy, any kind of company I've worked with globally begins with how self-aware is the leadership team? How self-aware is your board? How deep are we willing to go with people so that they can grow their own self-awareness? Because that to me is the predecessor to opening a door to the empathy that you mentioned earlier, Gertrude, which is integral. We can't feel for one another until we connect with one another. And I think oftentimes the barrier to that connection is something that perhaps is not in our conscious awareness. And so bringing that to the surface is the first, I think, point of ignition. And then we can use the spark from there to move forward.
That's awesome. So, in the realm of instructional design and facilitation, what key elements do you focus on to ensure impactful learning and development experiences?
I'm engagement obsessed. I think no matter how wonderful content is, if it's dry, boring, in any way, just not interactive or engaging for people, there's really no point. And
Yeah.
so I don't think people tend to have an issue with the content. I think most folks are really great at knowing, hey, this is what we need people to know. These are the important things. This is what we need to actually communicate. It's the how. It's not the what. It's the how that gets people lost. And a lot of the times I find it's skipping over really anticipating your audience, what they need to connect with you and what is going to resonate with them. And really, the old basic, the WIFM, what's in it for me. So
Yeah.
if you don't at least account for that before you even design, much less facilitate a session, no matter how absolutely stunning and amazing your content is, it won't have an impact. again, that's a perfect example of intention not aligning with impact, because you have to recognize who you're delivering to and how it's going to be best received by them, and not to be, it's almost in a way I find selfish, if I can use that word, to design without thinking about the audience in mind. What's the point? It's them that this is for. And any way that you can be collaborative, I think, too, in designing that. So any way that I can, pull people who are going to be part of that audience and ask them, what do you really want to know? What do you need to know? What's getting in your way of knowing these things is so helpful to driving both the design and delivery.
Yeah, then you're going to deliver appropriate content if you have their input right up front. I love that. So what unique approaches do you use in leadership development, especially when working with individuals from different backgrounds and industries?
This is where I think coaching is such an amazing linchpin for leadership development. And I would say that's something I use. So, depending on how I've come across a leader, it might be that I'm assigned to them as a coach, or that they've reached out to me and asked for coaching. But it could be that maybe I'm, consulting to their organization on a larger basis, or providing some kind of, training or facilitation, or even a speaking event. And then we end up connecting afterwards. I think, though, that in any case, if I have the opportunity to discuss one-to-one with them, what's really important to them, which to me, that it really is a coaching session. I can do it in 10 minutes, or we can spend 90 minutes getting really deep into it. But that one-to-one connection is, I think, what is unique, and what gives me the opportunity. It really is me finding out my audience too, the opportunity to find out what do they value, and where might they be missing the mark, that they feel that they have an opportunity to develop in, and aligning that with strengths that they can leverage. And a lot of times, half the battle is just identifying those strengths and helping them recognize ways in which they've used them before, and how they can now feed them forward in order to use them in their current or future situations. A lot of us, we have such amazing successes in life. We accomplish and achieve so many things in the face of all kinds of adversity, but we forget. Our brain focuses on the things we didn't get, we didn't do, didn't achieve, haven't yet done. And oftentimes, I think one of the most beautiful parts of being a coach is just holding up a mirror and saying, but remember when you did this? Remember how you did it? Let's talk about how that can move you forward from where you are right now.
Oh, I love it. Now, being someone from such a diverse background and living in Canada as a person of color, tell us some of your experiences with racism and how you've handled it.
Oh, there are so many. I casually mention them as especially when I'm doing DEI stuff or inclusive leadership and unconscious bias training. I know I've shared stories, and people who've actually been in more than a couple of my sessions will actually say to me, you never share the same story. I'm like, because I've got that many to draw from. It's quite an amazing trajectory, because I know that I have lots of, what we call headwinds. When you think about headwinds and tailwinds, I have lots of benefits and advantages that should hypothetically put me in a place where I experience very little racism, and yet theoretically that might be sound. In reality, that's not how it plays out. So I've had tons of experiences from childhood right on up to yesterday when it comes to racism. Some of them are very blatant. Some of them, though, are very subtle. And that's a very Canadian brand of racism. We're known for, is it really racism? Yeah, it is. A lot of microaggressing. And again, this is where I get called upon as a coach, oftentimes to work with leaders who have been accused of being racist. Can you help person X become a more inclusive leader, because those below them and the board want to see some accountability and see this person actually taking help. And most of the time when I work with these leaders one-to-one, they're completely unaware. They're completely unaware of how they've been microaggressing their employees, or that they have certain stereotypical assumptions about people that they've just kind of been bandying about without recognizing the kind of psychological impact it has on those in that group. And so, yeah, it's very much still prevalent. And I'd say certain world events exacerbate that as well, understandably so. And I think it really it increases the importance of talking about these things especially at different levels of society, from the family level, from elementary schools right on up. Because I think a lot of times too, at least in Canadian society, there's been a hesitancy to address these kinds of issues as if you're not going to experience racism as a child, so let's not explain it to you till high school, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I think it's important that we learn about it quite young, and that I think that we portray it realistically, that it's not something that is dead and gone, or no, that doesn't happen in Canada, but rather, yes, it does. Let's talk about it. Let's have conversations around it. And again, I think this goes back to that self-awareness piece. If people can recognize, well, this is the impact that that stereotype that you slapped on that group has, or that assumption you've made about that person has, they'll often act differently, just knowing, just having that awareness of, oh, I didn't realize.
That's amazing. So let's finish off with your coaching methodology. Can you elaborate on the EZRAX coaching methodology and how it differs from traditional coaching techniques?
So I'd say it's really a conglomerate of lots of different coaching methodologies. And if I were to isolate and summarize, I'd say performance and solution focused. Okay. And the way that I coach is very specifically person-centered as well. So always, I was Adlerian trained, so always recognizing that my client is whole, resourceful, and creative means that the solution that we're looking at creating must really originate with them. And I always say to them, if someone tells you to do something versus you coming to an aha moment, which one tends to be more powerful and sticks with you and is sustainable? And I'm pretty sure we'll all answer, when I'm not told what I'm supposed to do or who I am or what the situation's all about, but rather I've thought it through myself and come to conclusions that make sense to me, and have created a solution and a path forward that makes sense in my life that I'm actually going to take accountability for. So that's how I would describe it. Always whole person centered, and recognizing that strengths are there, we can leverage them, and no one's going to come up with a better solution to your problem than you.
Yeah. So finally, what advice would you give to those aspiring to become leaders or coaches in the field of DEI?
Buckle up. It's a bumpy ride, and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for those who are in any way rigid in their thinking. It's a constantly evolving journey. I mean, whether you're talking about vocabulary nomenclature, or whether you're talking about what kind of sources you're drawing upon, the groups you're working with, the issues they're facing, it can be completely different from day to day. And I know for myself, I'm very grateful that I've had long academic training in this area. I know a lot of DEI folks kind of have learned about it on the fly, or as they've been in different job roles and experienced things. I have the benefit of having a deep and long academic trajectory of learning about social justice, of racism, of the history of marginalization, colonialism, all of those things. So it's a little easier to connect dots and recognize this is a continuing path where we have to keep on learning what's going to happen next and how we can actually meet our clients' needs appropriately.
Oh, I love that. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming online and gracing us with your story. Good luck with all of the health challenges that you're facing. It sounds to me you have it under control. You are very, very resilient in your mindset, which I think is the first thing you need to address when you're facing a challenge like this. Is really, how do you take it on mentally and spiritually? So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Gertrude. Absolutely my pleasure.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is connecting us with phenomenal people from all over the world, sharing their experiences in this space. So be back again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks again, Dr. Gena. And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you. where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open,